Okay, I'm Scott Baxendale. I own the Colfax Guitar Shop here in Denver, Colorado, and I've been building and repairing and restoring guitars since the early 70s. I've worked in Nashville at Gruen Guitars. I used to own the Mossman Guitar Company, and I've owned the Colfax Guitar Shop here for 11 years. And my basic job is to repair and restore and build guitars. And I guess today we're talking about Les Paul and his influence on all of us here. And this guitar that I have in my hand right now is an authentic 1958 Les Paul Jr. This is was the economy version of the Les Paul that was available in 1958. And it looks yellow. And back in the day, that it was made, they called it TV yellow. And the reason for that is that a pure white guitar would cause a TV camera to have a ghost image. And so they made it this yellow color so that on a black and white TV it would look white, but it wouldn't make the lens flare out. So that's how this color was created and white was created. And the features that are common to all Les Pauls pretty much are the fact that they're made of mahogany, a mahogany neck and a mahogany body, and they have a certain feel and shape to them. Les Paul was not only a guitar maker, but he was the best guitar player of his generation. He also created multi-track recording. Every time we turn on the radio or TV and listen to anything that we hear, the technology used began with Les Paul, and so we basically owe our careers to him in a way. And as far as the invention of the solid body guitar, Les Paul was one of the early pioneers. Some people claim that he invented it. He didn't actually invent it, because I think it was one of those inventions that was occurring in parallel universes, so to speak, and it was occurring in California. At the same time, it was occurring with Les Paul in New Jersey, where he would live. But you had Leo Fender and you had Paul Bigsby out in California that were experimenting with solid body guitars, and you also had Rickenbacker, who began experimenting with them in the 30s, and Les Paul, who also began experimenting. He created the first. Some people say it's the first solid body guitar, but he called it the log, and it looked like a regular jazz guitar, but the whole centerpiece was a solid block, and then it had these like bodied attachments that made it shaped like a guitar. But the neck and the centerpiece was all one piece, and that was considered by many the first solid body guitar. Apparently, Les Paul approached Gibson as early as the early 40s to produce a solid body guitar, and they basically laughed him out of the shop, saying that there's no way this would ever happen. And then in the early 50s, after the early successes of Fender, they came straight back to him and go, we kind of remember that guitar you showed us. I think we'd like to build something along those lines now. And that was the creation of the first Les Paul guitar. Now, I have 3 Les Pauls here to show you. This one here is more similar to the original Les Paul than the Les Paul Jr. I just was playing. And this is a reproduction of the model they made in 1960. And the differences between this one and this guitar is that this one has a double cutaway with this extra horn here. And this is just a single cutaway, which is the traditional Les Paul shape. But you can also see that it has a arched top. I don't know if you can see how the top is arched, where it's thinner down here and it gets thicker up here. And the top piece of this Les Paul is made of maple, and it's what they call a carved top, in that they carve a thick piece of maple down on the edges and create this contour. The story behind that was they wanted to make the guitar harder to copy and forge, which back in that day probably meant something. Today it doesn't, because people copy it all the time. But this would be considered the Les Paul standard, and how you can tell the standard, it has the two pickups here, and these being the humbucker pickup, which was a design that came out in 1958, and Les Paul and Seth Lover, who was a technician that worked at Gibson, they collaborated, came up with the humbucker pickup, which the first guitar I showed you has the earlier style pickup, the single coil called a P90 pickup, and that was the early design, and that's just basically what they call a single coil pickup. And the advantages of a single coil pickup it's edgier sounding and brighter sounding, but the single coil allows interference and noise from lights and electrical outlets and stuff like that to create a buzz or a noise that you can hear at low volumes. Well, the humbucker pickup has two coils inside this metal cover, and the coils are wrapped opposite directions, so when it's on, the coils cancel out the noise, so you don't hear that noise, and so they're much quieter. And that design is still prevalent today in almost all new guitars. There's some sort of hum canceling pickup or a humbucker pickup that helps to reduce the amount of noise. And this is the other features you can see. This shows the mahogany much better than the other guitar. This is the natural wood mahogany look. And I think one of the main differences between a Gibson Les Paul, say, and compare it to a Fender Telecaster, for instance, is that this is made more like this is designed and made more along the lines of a violin in terms of how the shaping and the carving, the way the body's shaped and styled, which has always been Gibson's kind of mark in the musical instrument business. You know, when they invented the carved top mandolin, which replaced the bowl back mandolin, and it was the design was based on the violin style construction, and you can see that element years later when they began the Les Paul, you know, versus a Fender guitar, which is basically a flat plank of wood that's got holes routed in it with the neck attached on it. The neck on a Les Paul is angled back, which raises this up off the body more, and where your other modern guitar, other makers, the neck is usually flatter and this sits down on the body. And that just gives the guitar a completely different feel and sound. And even though the Les Paul originally was designed to play jazz on, I mean, that's what Les Paul played, was jazz and popular music, which in his day, jazz was the popular music. The guitar found a niche in rock and roll, and it was with the advent of bands like Cream and the Rolling Stones and some other bands from the late 60s where the Les Paul became really desirable and popular. And some other bands would be ZZ Top. Billy Gibbons had an early Les Paul, and his whole tone was defined by his playing of that guitar. And I'm sure when Les Paul created his guitar, he never imagined music like ZZ Top being played on it, or let alone Metallica or some of the heavy metal that came along later, you know, and it just has found its place in rock and roll history. I don't think Les ever imagined that that's what would happen with his guitar, but I think that he was probably happy it did.